You're listening to Thursday Night AMP on the Angry Marks Podcast Network.
From the VOC Nation, where you can also hear Jordan Garber, you have got the one and only Brady Hicks of In the Room. Brady, good evening.
What's going on, Stevie? How you doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic, and we had you booked in advance, so this is really good timing. But as it turns out, we have multiple things to talk about tonight, including the just-released PWI Top 500.
I'm very excited about this list, as always. It's kind of like every year, it's like my whole freelance job with PWI gets called under the microscope by so many different people. I love it. I love it.
Well, if there's ever a week to be called under the microscope, it's this week, because every single thing that's happened in the wrestling world since Monday has been under a microscope. Are you ready to talk about all the insanity of professional wrestling this week?
It's been absolutely crazy, but you know what? I wouldn't rather do it with anybody than you, Steve.
Oh, I'm flattered. I'll just give you the aw shucks, but I feel the same way about having you on the show tonight, Brady. So thank you for being here, and let's just get right into it. Let's just start with Jimmy Snuka. Superfly, after 32 years, is finally being charged with the death of his girlfriend, Nancy Argentino. After this long, who would have thought this would actually happen? But Brady, let's get your thoughts.
I mean, I certainly didn't think it was ever going to happen. It's kind of one of those dirty little secrets that I think everybody in the wrestling industry would talk about, would think about it, but it was kind of like this unspoken thing, you know? It was kind of like never really discussed publicly. And I know there's a lot of questions as far as who was involved, you know, if Jimmy was actually responsible for this, whatever the case may be. Obviously, we're going to leave that up to the court of law, but it's just bizarre to see somebody that I see all the time around the Philadelphia area doing all these different appearances, and somebody I come to know him and his family, his wife Carol, very closely, and for me it just seems so strange. It's almost surreal in a way.
It is, but it seems that the autobiography he released a few years ago was apparently his own undoing, because it was inconsistent with the statements that he gave to investigators in Lehigh County way back when, 32 years ago, when whatever incident between him and Nancy took place, and they compared that then to that now, and they said, well, we never officially closed this murder case, so maybe we should look into the fact that these things don't add up between then and now.
Who would have thought that all these prosecutors in Lehigh County, Pennsylvania, were such big wrestling fans that they would read the Jimmy Snuka book?
I'm not even sure they read that book. They might have even read the Irv Muchnick book, because I know he covered this in one of his many tomes about professional wrestling and went into very deep detail, including the fact that Vince McMahon apparently showed up to bail out Snuka. And we're not talking about Vince Sr. You could be confused, given this is 32 years ago. It was actually Vince Jr., the big boss nowadays, who was there to bail Snuka out. And this has raised a lot of questions as to what did Vince know? What didn't he know? Was there a cover-up? I mean, this is just a huge hornet's nest.
And I think we'll be finding out more and more in the coming weeks and months and probably years, Stevie. I mean, it's interesting to me. I noticed that the lawyer for Jimmy, he actually kind of went on record, I believe it was yesterday or maybe it was today, and he was kind of pointing out that Jimmy is so old and like so punch drunk, you know? He's hardly able to coherently answer a question, let alone string together a series of memories about something that happened more than 30 years ago. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't necessarily see Jimmy being able to testify. I find it interesting, honestly, that they were even able to get that much from a book out of him.
Well, let me put you on the spot here, because you just mentioned that you know him, you know his family, you've talked to him many times. So does he strike you as somebody that isn't able to put a coherent thought together? Does he strike you as somebody that's suffering from the severe dementia that his lawyer claims he has?
Yes, absolutely. I know it sounds insane to say that. Jimmy Snuka, he strings together this, and I hope I don't offend anyone saying this, but like he strings together these series of phrases, and that's how he has conversations with people. If you say, hey, Jimmy, like, are you going to be at WrestleMania this year? He'll be like, "Oh, brother, this year I will fly like no other," and like that's what he does. If I said to him, "Do you remember taking on the Undertaker at WrestleMania 7?" He'd be like, "Oh, brother, we tangled all over," and like that's how he is. He just generically speaks. He doesn't answer questions.
Right, but how much of that is the Superfly gimmick? Because he was always a little incomprehensible, even at the peak of his popularity.
I think that this is really him. I do. Having dealt with him behind the scenes at shows, having dealt with him at autograph signings, having had him on my podcast as well for a shoot interview. That's just Jimmy. I find it amazing that they think that they're going to get enough out of him to be able to pursue this, but I guess just based on the evidence in the book, it's worth a look.
Yeah, and I think they're not going to be relying on his testimony at the trial. They'll be relying on eyewitness testimony from people who were there at the time, the wrestlers who were riding with him, traveling from town to town. As I understand it, they used to tape multiple episodes of television in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is where this incident with him and Nancy took place. And that to me is going to be the key, is how many people were there at the same taping, how many people rode with him, how many people saw him. And I'm not personally witness to any of that. Even though I'm old enough to have been around at that time, I obviously don't live in Pennsylvania. I never went to those tapings. I don't know what those people know.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I don't want to speak out of turn because I've never talked with Jimmy or Carol about any of this, but just my own observations, I think it would be very, very difficult to kind of string something like this together. But on the other hand, I don't think they would have indicted him if there wasn't something there to at least look at it.
They have to feel they've finally put together enough of a case for it to be worth pursuing. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But in WWE's mind, it's not playing out well because they've already scrubbed every reference to Jimmy Snuka from their website, including the Hall of Fame, which he is a member of, but you cannot find his Hall of Fame page on WWE.com.
Now, do you think that if it turns out that Vince McMahon played a part in the cover-up, do you think that the chairman himself would eventually get scrubbed from the entire company?
That would be really, really bizarre. I mean, I think the only way Vince McMahon ever gets scrubbed from WWE.com is he just personally decides, I'm handing over the reins to Triple H and Stephanie. I don't need to be a part of this anymore. I'm done. I'm going on vacation for the rest of my life. That would be the only way I could see him disappearing.
Well, I mean, it's a publicly traded company, though. What if the shareholders turn around and demand his resignation? You've seen it so many times with much bigger companies.
I'm not saying that couldn't be a possibility. I would think that he would be called accountable in some degree, and he would have to turn over his role as CEO to somebody else in the company, either one of the vice presidents or possibly Mr. Levesque himself. I don't know how that would work.
Sure.
Let me ask you, both of you this then. Since it appears that it's very unlikely that Jimmy Snuka would be able to give a competent amount of testimony, basically it looks like prosecutors are gonna have to rely on eyewitness events, right?
Right, and or whatever statements he gave to Lehigh County authorities back then.
Do you see anybody else possibly taking a stand and providing testimony?
I'm sure that his lawyer, if he's got a competent lawyer, will have character witnesses who will testify on his behalf that he's not that kind of person.
Do you think anybody would testify against him?
Yeah, because the prosecutors at the time did speak to people who said that Jimmy Snuka had problems with substance abuse, and obviously these are allegations I can neither confirm nor deny, but cocaine was definitely mentioned as something that Snuka had a problem with, and certain people said they wouldn't ride in the car with Snuka because he was quote-unquote a crazy man, unquote, when he was on cocaine. And Brady's laughing, so I've either tickled his funny bone or he knows something I don't.
No, I mean, it's just, you know what, you hear so many stories from the 80s, all these crazy stories that all these old-timers have. But, I mean, to look at this objectively, I mean, you've got a 72-year-old guy. He has stomach cancer. his prognosis isn't great to live beyond like the next year or two, realistically. Just given the nature of his health right now. And that's to say nothing about the amount of stress that he's under. I mean, WWE wiping his legacy aside, I don't see that this has that much long-term impact on much of anything, other than possibly WWE's own implications in it.
Yeah, I just got my gut feeling that if we're going to rely on eyewitness testimony, I don't think that's going to be very cooperative either, because after all this time, you're either going to get, let's be honest, wrestling was still very closed rank back then. Wrestlers didn't really let too many outside people into their circle. So my gut feeling is that what's going to end up happening is you're going to have wrestlers who may have said or done things anywhere in the past 32 years regarding this incident. They take the stand, and either they legitimately don't remember, or they're going to close ranks again and protect Snuka by basically telling prosecutors, I don't remember, I don't recall, I can't recollect, and just not provide anything at all useful for the prosecution to go on.
Well, then they're just going to have to rely on the medical examiner's testimony that they felt at the time that she had cerebral hemorrhaging that was not consistent with slipping on a mossy patch of grass and hitting her head on a rock. They were basically convinced that she could not have suffered that much damage unless somebody physically caused it.
Well, Matt, maybe that's enough to stick, maybe it's not.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, or it may even be that, given what Brady said is true, that he's battling stomach cancer and not in the best of health in general. He may just take a plea and agree to a reduced sentence in exchange for, just admitting guilt.
I mean, it's so tough to say because you don't know what kind of evidence that they have. They obviously weren't able to convict him 30 years ago when the testimony would have been a whole lot more fresh and it would have been easier to get more witnesses, as you put it. I mean, it's so tough to know the way that this is going.
Right, and that's, of course, the whole reason that people think there's a cover-up involved is because, like you said, 30 years ago, it would have been a whole lot easier to arrest him and put him on trial back then, and it never happened. And so many people... Irv Muchnick, I actually heard him talk about this in a podcast within the last 24 hours, and Irv says that it's just dumbfounding how many people involved, how many district attorneys and prosecutors simply walked away from the case saying they didn't have the evidence to prosecute, when clearly they have that evidence now, so why didn't they do it then? Which makes you really suspicious as to why they didn't. But nobody knows anything for sure.
Well, again, I think it all comes back to Jimmy Snuka's book. There were some things that were written in there, and for the life of me, innocent or guilty, whatever the case may be, I don't know why you would go into great detail in the book anyway. I mean, to me, it doesn't make any sense. I would have dedicated the book to the poor girl who died, and I would have maybe just throwaway line about how I had nothing to do with it, and I'm not going to speak about it because all the information is out there, and there's nothing that I can add to it at this point. So I don't quite understand the merits of going into detail in a book. Certainly enough that it would bring into question everything that you've said in the past. I don't know.
It just feels like he was opening his own mouth and inserting his own foot. Like, if he knew that there were still unanswered questions, why raise more? It just doesn't add up for him to do that.
And I mean, listen, I can say everything that I've read about Jimmy Snuka in the last few days, and I can put all that out there. I can continue to spread it like everyone else had, or I could approach it from the point of view of someone who's come to know Jimmy and Carol and their family, their grandchildren, and I know that Jimmy's a peaceful man. I know that Jimmy, as he is now, as I've known him for the last 5 or 6 years, he wouldn't hurt a fly. He really wouldn't. That's not Jimmy in the 80s. I don't know Jimmy in the 80s. I can only tell you the Jimmy that I know now, and it seems like a really big stretch that he could have ever done stuff like that. That they're kind of hinting at him having done.
Well, as they all say, whether it's rock and roll or professional wrestling or any other sport, cocaine is a hell of a drug. So we'll just see how it plays out. But who knows? You might actually be called as a character witness yourself.
Well, that's why I'm being very careful not to say anything.
Well, let's talk about something else then. There's certainly a whole lot of other subjects that are complete insanity this week.